The day Mike accidentally walked in on me in the shower, I thought it was the most embarrassing moment of my life. I had no idea it would become the beginning of the biggest love story I'd ever experienced. But before we could be together, there were hidden feelings, late-night confessions, and one moment that nearly changed everything. If you've ever fallen for your best friend, this story will stay with you until the very last second. Watson had always been a man of routine. Every weekday in Seattle looked exactly the same. He woke up early, made coffee, checked his emails, and got ready for work before most of the city was even awake. Living with Mike for almost a year had made those mornings even better. They weren't just roommates anymore. Somewhere along the way, they had become best friends. Mike was everything Watson wasn't. Where Watson planned everything, Mike loved surprises. Where Watson worried about every little detail, Mike somehow managed to make life look easy. Despite their differences, they worked perfectly together. At least that's what Watson had always believed. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Watson stepped into the bathroom, turned on the shower, and let the warm water wash away the stress of another long workweek. Steam slowly filled the room. For the first time in days, he felt completely relaxed. Then he heard the bathroom door open. His eyes widened instantly. "Mike?" he called from behind the shower curtain. No answer, just silence. Watson frowned. "Mike!" A second later, Mike's voice finally appeared. "Oh!" The surprise in his tone was obvious. Sorry, but strangely, he didn't leave right away. Watson hesitated before pulling the curtain aside slightly. Mike stood near the sink looking completely frozen. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Neither seemed to know what to do. Mike quickly looked away. "I thought you'd already left for work." Watson laughed awkwardly. "Clearly not." "Yeah." Mike rubbed the back of his neck. "Clearly." Normally they would have laughed about something like this. Normally it wouldn't have been a big deal. But for some reason, this moment felt different. The air suddenly felt heavier, more awkward, more personal. Watson couldn't explain why. And judging by Mike's expression, neither could he. A few seconds later, Mike finally escaped from the bathroom. The door closed. Watson stood beneath the water trying to understand why his heart was suddenly racing. The strange feeling followed him throughout the entire day. At work, he found himself replaying the moment over and over. Not because Mike had accidentally walked in. Because of the way Mike had looked at him afterward. And because of the way Watson had felt. For months he had ignored a truth he wasn't ready to face. A truth that had slowly been growing stronger every day. He cared about Mike. More than a roommate. More than a friend. At first he had convinced himself it was nothing. Just admiration. Just friendship. But lately that explanation wasn't working anymore. He looked forward to every dinner together. Every late-night conversation. Every movie marathon. Every stupid joke that somehow made him laugh. And now those feelings were becoming impossible to ignore. When Watson finally returned home that evening, the smell of food greeted him before he even reached the kitchen. Mike stood at the stove cooking dinner. The sight immediately made Watson smile. "There you are," Mike said. The simple words shouldn't have affected him. Yet somehow they did. Watson set his bag down. "Smells amazing." Mike grinned. "Told you I'd make something better than takeout." Dinner started normally. They talked about work. They joked about their neighbors. They debated what movie to watch later. But halfway through the meal, Mike suddenly became quiet. Watson noticed immediately. "You okay?" Mike looked up. "Yeah." Then he paused. "Actually, can I ask you something?" Watson nodded. "Sure." Mike stared down at his plate for a moment before speaking. "Do you ever feel like your life changes without warning?" Watson frowned. "What do you mean?" Mike seemed to search for the right words. "I don't know." He gave a nervous laugh. "Like one normal moment happens, and suddenly you start seeing someone differently." Watson's heartbeat immediately quickened. Their eyes met across the table. For several seconds, neither looked away. Neither spoke. The atmosphere between them shifted. Something unspoken lingered in the silence. Something neither seemed ready to name, yet both clearly felt. Mike finally looked down first. Watson released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The conversation eventually moved on. They watched a movie. They laughed. They acted like everything was normal. But later that night, lying awake in bed, Watson couldn't stop thinking about Mike's question. Because deep down, he knew exactly what Mike meant. And for the first time, he started wondering if maybe he wasn't the only one struggling with feelings that had quietly grown into something much bigger than friendship. The days that followed should have felt normal. But they didn't. Ever since that conversation at dinner, Watson couldn't stop noticing things about Mike that he had somehow overlooked before. The way Mike smiled whenever he walked into a room. The way his face lit up whenever Watson laughed at one of his terrible jokes. The way he always seemed happiest when they were spending time together. Every little detail suddenly felt important. Dangerously important. Watson tried convincing himself he was overthinking everything. Maybe Mike's question had meant nothing. Maybe he was imagining the connection. Maybe he was reading too much into ordinary moments. But the more he tried to ignore his feelings, the harder they became to hide. Especially around Mike. One Friday evening, a storm rolled across Seattle. Rain tapped steadily against the apartment windows while the city disappeared beneath dark clouds. Neither of them had plans. So they ordered pizza, grabbed blankets, and settled onto the couch for a movie marathon. Something they had done dozens of times before. At first everything felt normal. They laughed at the same scenes. Argued about which actor gave the best performance. Shared snacks. But as the evening continued, Watson became increasingly aware of how close they were sitting. Their shoulders occasionally brushed. Their hands nearly touched whenever they reached for popcorn. Small things. Meaningless things. Yet somehow they didn't feel meaningless anymore. Halfway through the second movie, Mike shifted slightly. His shoulder rested comfortably against Watson's. Neither moved away. The contact was simple, natural. But Watson felt his heart speed up immediately. He wasn't sure whether Mike noticed. Or maybe Mike noticed everything. The thought alone made him nervous. When the movie ended, silence filled the apartment. Outside, rain continued falling. Inside, neither seemed eager to leave the couch. Mike stared toward the television screen for several seconds before finally speaking. "Can I tell you something?" Watson looked over. Of course Mike laughed nervously. Something Watson almost never saw. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "When we first became roommates, I thought we'd probably just tolerate each other." Watson smiled. "Really?" Mike nodded. "Seriously?" He shook his head. "I never expected we'd become this close." Watson felt warmth spread through his chest. "Neither did I." Mike's expression softened. For a moment he simply looked at him. Then he spoke quietly. "You've become the person I trust most." Watson's heartbeat quickened. Mike continued. "When something good happens, you're the first person I want to tell." His voice grew softer. "And when something bad happens," he smiled, "you're the person I want beside me." Watson suddenly couldn't look away. Neither could Mike. The room felt different. Smaller somehow. More intimate. More honest. Watson swallowed. "You mean that?" Mike nodded immediately. "Yeah." The answer came without hesitation. Without doubt. And somehow that made it even more powerful. Watson smiled. "You're that person for me too." Something changed in Mike's expression. Relief. Hope. Maybe even happiness. Neither said anything for several seconds. Neither needed to. The silence itself carried meaning. Eventually Mike laughed softly. "I think we're getting emotional." Watson laughed too. Maybe a little. The tension eased. But the feeling remained. Growing stronger with every passing day. Over the following weeks, they spent more time together than ever. Morning coffee runs. Weekend walks through the city, late-night conversations that stretched far beyond midnight. Every moment felt effortless. Yet beneath the comfort of their friendship, something new continued to grow. Something neither man could ignore much longer. Then one evening, while they were watching the sunset from a quiet overlook above Elliott Bay, Mike said something that made Watson's heart nearly stop. "You ever wonder if we're both pretending not to notice something?" Watson looked at him. Mike wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking for the first time. The question hanging between them felt impossible to avoid. And Watson realized that sooner or later, one of them was finally going to say what both had been feeling for months. Watson spent the next several days replaying Mike's words in his mind. You ever wonder if we're both pretending not to notice something? The question followed him everywhere. At work, during his morning coffee, even when he was trying to sleep. Because deep down he knew exactly what Mike meant. The problem was admitting it. Once spoken aloud, there would be no going back. Their friendship would change forever. And that terrified him. Yet losing the chance to be honest terrified him even more. The following Saturday, Mike suggested they spend the afternoon exploring Seattle's waterfront. It was one of their favorite places, a place where they could walk for hours and talk about anything. The weather was perfect. The sky was clear. Tourists filled the streets while boats drifted peacefully across Elliott Bay. Everything felt normal, at least at first. They grabbed coffee and wandered through the crowded waterfront market. Mike seemed unusually relaxed, almost happy, as if he had already made some important decision. Watson couldn't stop wondering what that decision might be. Hours passed. The crowd slowly thinned. Eventually they found themselves standing near the water, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. Golden light reflected across the bay. The city skyline glowed behind them. It was beautiful, yet Watson barely noticed, because Mike was standing beside him. And for the first time, neither of them seemed interested in pretending anymore. Mike broke the silence first. Can I ask you something? Watson smiled nervously. You've asked me that a lot lately. Mike laughed. Fair point. Then his expression became serious again. Just answer honestly. Watson's pulse quickened. Okay. Mike stared out toward the water. For several moments he said nothing. Then finally, have you ever thought about us being more than friends? The world seemed to stop. Watson felt his heart slam against his chest. There it was. The question both of them had been avoiding. The truth they had been dancing around for months. Mike finally turned toward him. His eyes revealed everything. Hope, fear, vulnerability. Watson realized Mike wasn't brave because he wasn't scared. Mike was brave because he asked despite being scared. For a second, Watson couldn't speak. Then he laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because the relief was overwhelming. Every day, Mike blinked. What? Watson smiled. I think about it every day. The tension disappeared instantly. Mike released a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for months. You do. Watson nodded. Yeah. A smile slowly spread across Mike's face. The kind of smile Watson had never seen before. Genuine. Unfiltered. Happy. Neither man looked away. Neither wanted to. The waterfront around them suddenly felt distant. The crowds disappeared. The noise faded. For that moment, only the two of them existed. Mike took a small step closer. Watson didn't move away. Instead, he closed the distance himself. Their shoulders touched. Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. Then Mike quietly asked, So what happens now? Watson laughed. I have absolutely no idea. Mike laughed too, the nervousness between them finally breaking. For several minutes they stood together talking honestly for the first time. About their feelings. About their fears. About how long each of them had been trying to ignore what was obvious. The answers surprised both of them. Mike admitted he'd started falling for Watson months ago. Watson confessed he had felt the same way. Neither could believe how much time they had wasted pretending. As sunset painted the sky orange and gold, Mike reached for Watson's hand. The gesture was simple, yet it felt bigger than anything either of them had said. Watson looked down at their hands, then back at Mike. Without hesitation, he intertwined their fingers. The smile that appeared on Mike's face made Watson's heart melt for the first time. There were no secrets between them. No confusión. No pretending. Just honesty and hope. As they walked home hand in hand, both understood that everything had changed. Not because of one awkward moment in a bathroom. Not because of one conversation. But because two best friends had finally found the courage to tell each other the truth. And neither of them realized that their greatest challenge, and their happiest moments, were still waiting ahead. The walk back to the apartment felt completely different from every walk they had taken before. Their hands remained intertwined almost the entire way. Neither wanted to let go. Every now and then Watson would catch himself smiling for no reason. Then he would glance at Mike and realize Mike was doing exactly the same thing. For months they had hidden their feelings. Now they finally had permission to be honest. And honesty felt surprisingly easy. The next morning Watson woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight filtered through the apartment windows. For a moment he wondered if everything from the previous night had been a dream. Then he heard movement in the kitchen. Mike. A smile instantly appeared on Watson's face. He walked into the kitchen and found Mike making coffee. Their eyes met. Neither said anything. Neither needed to. Mike smiled. Morning. Watson smiled back. Morning. The simple exchange felt different now. Warmer. More meaningful. Mike handed him a mug. Their fingers briefly touched. Both laughed. Neither could stop smiling. This is ridiculous, Mike said. What is? We've known each other for a year. Watson nodded. And? Mike shook his head. Why am I suddenly nervous around you? Watson laughed. Because now we both know. Mike pointed at him exactly. For the first time in months, everything felt uncomplicated. No guessing. No wondering. No hiding. Just two people who genuinely cared about each other. A week later, Mike planned their first official date. He refused to tell Watson where they were going. The mystery drove Watson crazy. You know I hate surprises. Mike grinned. That's why this is fun. After work, Mike picked him up and drove toward downtown Seattle. The city lights sparkled against the evening sky. When they finally arrived, Watson realized Mike had reserved a table at a small rooftop restaurant overlooking the waterfront. The view was incredible. The atmosphere was perfect. Watson looked at him across the table. You planned all this? Mike suddenly looked embarrassed. Maybe. Watson laughed. Maybe? Okay, yes. Mike rubbed the back of his neck. I wanted it to be special. The words hit Watson harder than expected. Not because of the restaurant. Not because of the view. Because he could see how much effort Mike had put into making him happy. Dinner lasted for hours. They talked about everything. Childhood memories. Future goals. Places they wanted to visit. Dreams they had never shared with anyone else. The conversation felt effortless. Natural. Like it always had. Only now there was something deeper connecting them. After dinner, they walked through the city together. The streets were alive with music and lights. A cool breeze drifted through the night air. At one point, they stopped near a quiet section of the waterfront. The same water that had witnessed their confession now reflected thousands of city lights. Mike leaned against the railing beside him. Can I admit something? Watson smiled. Sure. Mike laughed nervously. I spent months trying not to fall for you. Watson immediately laughed. Months? Mike nodded. Maybe longer. Watson shook his head. Good. Mike looked confused. Good. Watson smiled. Because I spent months trying not to fall for you too. Mike stared at him for a second. Then both burst into laughter. The honesty felt liberating. Like a weight had finally disappeared. The laughter slowly faded. Neither looked away. The distance between them suddenly felt very small. Watson could hear his own heartbeat. Mike's expression softened. There was no uncertainty left. No fear. Only affection. Only trust. Mike moved slightly closer. Not rushing. Not assuming. Simply giving Watson the opportunity to decide. Watson smiled. Then took a step closer too. The gentle kiss they shared felt natural. Comfortable. Unhurried. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. It was something better. Real. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Mike looked almost amazed. Watson felt exactly the same. For a moment they simply stood there, looking at each other while the city lights reflected across the water behind them. Neither could stop smiling. Neither wanted the night to end. Because after months of uncertainty, they finally had something real. Something worth protecting. Something worth fighting for. And neither of them realized that life was about to test just how strong that connection truly was. Time has a strange way of changing everything, and also proving what was real from the beginning. For Watson and Mike, the months after that night by the waterfront didn't feel like a dramatic movie transformation. Felt natural, like something that had always been waiting to happen. At first, they didn't even know how to label themselves properly. Were they dating? Were they still best friends? Were they both? So they didn't rush it. They just stayed close. A little closer every day. Mornings became their favorite part of life. Watson would wake up and find Mike already in the kitchen, quietly making coffee, music playing low in the background. And every single time, Mike would glance over and smile like it was the easiest thing in the world. "Sleep okay?" Mike would ask. And Watson would always answer the same way. Better than okay. Because it was true. Life had started feeling lighter, safer, happier. But what surprised Watson most wasn't the romance. It was how Mike stayed Mike. Still joking. Still teasing. Still messing up simple things like burning toast or losing his keys. Only now, there was something softer underneath everything. Something intentional. Something that made Watson feel chosen. One Saturday morning, they went grocery shopping together. It should have been boring, but somehow it turned into laughter in every aisle. Mike pushed the cart like a kid, pretending it was a race car. Watson kept telling him to slow down while laughing too hard to be serious. At one point, Mike leaned closer and whispered, "If we keep acting like this, people are going to think we're in love." Watson froze for half a second, then smiled. "We are." Mike didn't even hesitate. "Yeah," he said softly. "We are." And just like that, the moment passed. But something deeper settled in. No cuernis. No fear. Just truth. Later that evening, rain started falling again over Seattle. Not heavy. Just soft rain against the windows. They stayed in. Ordered food. Watched a movie they barely paid attention to. Because halfway through it, Watson noticed Mike wasn't even looking at the screen. He was looking at him. Watson turned slightly. "What?" Mike smiled. "I still can't believe this is real sometimes." Watson raised an eyebrow. "This?" Mike nodded. "Us." The word hit differently. Not heavy. Not scary. Just meaningful. Watson shifted closer on the couch. "Get used to it," he said quietly. Mike laughed softly. Then there was silence. Comfortable silence. The kind that didn't need to be filled. The kind that felt like home. Mike slowly reached for Watson's hand. Not sudden. Not unsure. Just steady. Watson held it immediately. Their fingers naturally fit together now, like they had always belonged that way. Mike squeezed gently. "I used to think I was just lucky to have you as a roommate," he said. Watson smirked. "And now?" Mike looked at him for a long moment. "Now I think I was lucky to get you at all." That was the moment Watson leaned in first. Not rushed. Not nervous. Just sure. Their kiss this time felt different from the first one. The first had been discovery. This one was familiarity. Like something they had done before in another lifetime. Mike's hand gently moved to Watson's cheek. Watson smiled against the kiss for a second before pulling back slightly. Both were breathing softly. Both were smiling. Neither said anything, because nothing needed to be said. Weeks turned into months, and slowly life built itself around them. They learned each other in ways friendship had never fully revealed. Watson learned Mike got quiet when he was thinking deeply. Mike learned Watson needed reassurance more often than he admitted. They adjusted. They grew. They understood. There were small arguments, too, about stupid things. Dishes left in the sink. Late-night snacks disappearing. Movie choices. But nothing ever felt like distance. Because every disagreement ended the same way. With laughter. Or a hug. Or Mike pulling Watson closer like nothing had ever happened. One evening, as spring began to replace winter, they went back to the waterfront. The same place where everything had changed. The sky was clear. The water calm. City lights reflecting softly across the surface. They stood there quietly for a while. Then Mike spoke. "You know what's crazy?" Watson didn't look away from the view. "What?" Mike smiled. If I hadn't walked into that bathroom that morning, Watson immediately laughed. Don't start again. Mike laughed too. But I'm serious. He turned toward him. That one stupid moment changed everything. Watson finally looked at him. And I'm glad it did? Mike nodded. Me too. The wind moved gently between them. Watson reached for his hand without thinking. Mike held it instantly, no hesitation anymore. No uncertainty. Just certainty. Just them. Watson looked at the city glowing in front of them. I used to think love had to be loud, he said. Mike glanced at him. Oh yeah. Watson nodded. Big moments. Big drama. Big everything. Mike smiled softly. And now, Watson squeezed his hand. Now I think it's just choosing someone every day. Mike didn't respond immediately. He just looked at him, then leaned in and kissed him again. Softly, slowly, like a promise. When they pulled back, Mike rested his forehead lightly against Watson's. Then I choose you, he said quietly. Watson smiled. Good, he replied, because I choose you too. Behind them, the city continued moving. Lights, cars, noise, life. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because for Watson and Mike, the future wasn't something uncertain anymore. It was something they were already building, together. And as they walked home hand in hand under the Seattle night sky, Watson realized something simple. The best part of his life hadn't started with a perfect moment. It had started with an unexpected one. And it had grown into everything he never knew he needed. If you enjoyed Watson and Mike's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional love stories like this.